Hello and welcome to Beyond Top 10 Tennis. My name is Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge and I'm your host. I'm the author of 11 books, a CEO of 12 years, the founder of a startup set on data privacy, and most importantly, an elite performance coach of over 18 years, having worked with athletes throughout Europe, the United States to Australia. And most excitingly, I am the world's leading scientist on coach and athlete performance, specifically when it comes to developing a top 10 tennis ranking. My work includes everything from mitigating injuries to conditioning behaviors that set a player up long term for the long game towards that top 10 tennis ranking. I'm behind theories from the optimal performance theory, optimal behavior for optimal performance, the barrier breaker, the rule of transference to the golden rule. As has become custom, each episode we dive into one of my books to share additional insights and dig a little bit deeper. We've been focusing on the secrets to optimal performance success, a comprehensive discussion on developing elite coaches and players, with over 40 episodes today. Today's topic plays its own role, like so many other episodes, in developing the player, parent to coach for that road ahead towards a top 10 tennis ranking. So, as always, buckle in and enjoy the ride. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you've been with us for some time now, well, thank you so much as always. But today's episode is a really good recap, but of chapter 1. And I'm really looking forward to it. And for those of you who are new, this is a really good opportunity to just dive in, to grasp some really important snippets, concepts, additional insights, to really ascertain what those earlier episodes were really about. And look, today we're focusing on the coach-athlete relationship. So if you want to follow along, it does start on page 27. So today's episode, it's a little bit different because if you are up to speed or up to date, our most recent episode really was the final chapter of this book. And when I say the final chapter, it was the final section of that chapter. So it really brought the secrets to optimal performance success to a close, almost. And before we, I think, finish up this book, it's so important to really dig even deeper. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, but how or why? And there are so many intersections that happen throughout this book. And since we've discussed, I think, these individual sections now, in their own context or shape, and really delivered on those additional insights, it provides that perfect opportunity now to correlate, to really show how they weave together, especially if we're looking at that pathway towards that top 10 tennis ranking, irrespective of where you're at on your journey. And I think that's so important, whether you are a top 20 tennis player, top 100 tennis player, or you are that 13, 14-year-old at club/academy level, progressing towards becoming a professional tennis player or athlete for that matter, which is really important, I think, to highlight, because there are so many cross sections in this work that's not just for the tennis player. And now, if you're familiar with the work, you'll probably recall that quite often I phrase or term that player as the player/athlete, because I think the player-athlete has a multitude of identities there, and they may identify as that athlete and or as that player. And there are different connotations in some contexts / cultures about what constitutes a tennis player or what constitutes that athlete. Personally, for example, growing up, I never viewed myself as an athlete because that tennis player, again from my personal experience, was not viewed in that way. It was viewed just as that tennis player. And it wasn't until I got older, and obviously with all the work behind me now, that it was so powerful in recognizing that that tennis player really is an incredible athlete. And I think that really needs to be run home, so to say, to empower athletes, tennis players, irrespective where you are, that context, that cultural setting, etc. If you are in that sporting environment and you are putting in the work, you are that athlete. But you know what? You are also that tennis player as well. And irrespective what sport you're in, whether it's basketball, sure, you're a basketball player, but you're also an athlete. If you're in soccer, sure, you're a soccer player, but you're also that athlete. And I think there's a really powerful connection there. And more often than not, unfortunately, poor understandings around what each term really means, and that they really do intersect. They are not separate. Irrespective of what sport you are in, sure, you are that sports person, a sportsman and or sportswoman, and you are also that athlete. And when we're able to change the dialogue, so change the conversation to include that, that really opens up a whole other discussion, which we really haven't had the chance to date to talk about the secrets to optimal performance success. So this is really one of many topics we now get the chance to discuss. And we have that platform now behind us. So if you are new, I really would encourage you to dive into at least a handful of our previous episodes to just really gauge where we're coming from, to really understand those foundations that now have been built with over the 40 episodes to date. So we've got now over 45 episodes previously to catch up on. But we've also been on a journey. So if you've been with us from the very beginning, well, thank you so much, because you know and appreciate and understand how far we've come and just the conversations we're able to have together. And I'm so hopeful that with each episode there has been a takeaway, whether it's one or two, it doesn't matter. As long as there's that one piece of information you're able to take away and apply with your players and your athletes. And maybe today's context could be that takeaway in respect to that athlete and that athlete mentality. It's not just that tennis player mentality, it's also recognizing that tennis player or players that you work with, potentially for those coaches out there, they're also that athlete. And for the parents to really, grasp of what your child is going through, not just from a performance perspective, it's also from that identity. And we will get there. And we do have episodes around that and that balancing act. But it's so important then to have those conversations with your child as the player, but also recognize that they're that athlete. So the performance, I think, the metrics are actually dual. So there's both sides. When you can look at the typical tennis player, you may potentially think your initial thoughts are performance based or results based on court, opposed to that athlete where they're incredibly dynamic with their movement on court, and that they do incorporate incredible performance characteristics throughout their game in play. as they work towards building that whole athlete. And that really underscores the secrets to optimal performance success, because we're looking at that whole athlete and the varying, I think, accommodations that need to be made along the way. And when we're looking at this specific chapter on that, that coach-athlete relationship, it's so incredibly powerful. And one of the first sections that we dive into throughout this chapter is the coach-parent relationship, and it's linked to performance success. So that is on page 29. Now, we do have, obviously, one of our first episodes is on this, but it would be incredibly fair and reasonable to say that it was quite brief. Sure, there were a lot of details and insights there, but given it was one of our very first episodes, I think it was a lot different. And it was quite structured in its approach, because I really wanted to make sure all the way back then that some key pieces were shared. But there's a very good chance that there was a lot of hesitancy there to make sure that just, say, X, Y, and Z were covered, in contrast to that whole. Because I can share this now because of how far we've come with not only the episodes behind us, but now we've had the opportunity to discuss the whole book in detail. And if we look at it, that's over, not that I've done a calculation, there's probably a good 30 hours there behind us, which is incredible, because we've gone from, I think, smaller segments, so in shorter in length, so they're a bit more brief, to ones that have been a bit more elaborate. And I would absolutely love feedback on that, and what you find, I think, most comfortable, or I think that the best medium. I think we've hit our sweet spot in that respect, but please obviously prove me wrong. Back to that coach-parent relationship. Now, very early on, we've touched on the triangular relationship here, and it's been somewhat of a theme through a lot of our episodes. It probably touched on in at least half, if not more. And what we talk about is the power of looking or viewing as that relationship as part of a triangular relationship, because you have that dynamic when we're looking at that coach-athlete relationship. And if you're new to that, it's really a quite common or popularized term in sports coaching. So when we're looking at the literature in that respect, where it's just looking at the dynamic there between the coach and the athlete and or the player, and in that relationship context. So there are different dynamics there. And there's also, we need to acknowledge the power tussle in that relationship, which we've only really touched on briefly. It probably more in depth in some of our blogs. We've shared that I've personally written about. But a brief snippet or how to view that, and this is where the parent comes in, is that when you are in an adult/child relationship, it's the same when you're looking at the parent-child relationship. And it's so important to phrase the word and the understanding or connotation behind relationship here is that we're just looking at two individuals. There is no personal, so to say, relationship. We're being very careful here that it's about those two individuals building that foundation there. So it's like a partnership to look ahead for that long game, how two people can work together incredibly effectively. So you look at that adult and that child in this situation, and it's important to acknowledge the power there, because when we say power, it's obviously there's more control there from that coach as the older person, more often than not, and then that child and or that athlete or player as the younger person. And because we are so used to, again, with that humanized approach that is a common theme throughout, so this is applicable in life as just the same, is that we know that the not necessarily the boundaries in place, but the limitations from that child player athlete to be able to take the reins, to take control, because at the end of the day, they are still that younger person in the room, growing into themselves, evolving into that player athlete they are going to be or aspiring to be. So this is obviously for the younger athletes out there, let's say under 16, 15 years of age, who are not yet finding that more mature voice. And it's okay if you're that 17, 18-year-old and you're still finding it. That's completely understandable, and that is normal. But I'm just giving a ballpark figure here, because as you get older, towards that 18, 19 years old, and you've grown into that young adult then. So you're moving outside of that scope. So you're building those levels of maturity. And once you are that young adult and you feel more empowered to find that voice, the dynamic there when it comes to power has the capacity to change in a very healthy way. And we want to say or share that this can happen earlier if the coach provides the opportunity and that platform. And I really want to encourage this for the coaches out there, to allow that player athlete to find their voice. Now, some of you out there might find this a bit intimidating, but please, let's rephrase it. So reframe that coach-athlete relationship so it's mutual. There's mutual levels of respect. You are a team, irrespective if you are that older person and younger. It's a team, just like every mother and child, father and child is a team dynamic. And together, then you can go that triangular relationship, how the two adults then work together with that child. And then here you have the coach and the parent working together for that child, that player, that athlete. But it's important to share that why. What's the parent's role? Why is there a level of importance or significance in this respect? And it comes down to encouraging the parents out there and or guardians, so irrespective of that parental figure in that player's, athlete's life, it's about having that conversation with your child, how comfortable they are talking with the coach. So you are, in a way, not a gatekeeper as such, but allowing or working with your child to find their voice and to make sure that the power tussle there in that coach-athlete relationship is reciprocal, and it's not necessarily respected. Of course, it should be respected on both sides, but you need to be conscious, again, for the parents, guardians out there, that your child has the opportunity to be heard and that they are being listened to and understood, not just directed and or instructed, and that they do not have a voice, so their opinions don't matter. We want the opposite. We want those opinions to count and to matter, so that coach and athlete, they work together. So for the parents, your child has an effective coach where they're a team. They're learning to work together, and it's a wonderful exchange, because we know that is the link to performance success. One of many, but this is one of where it starts and can begin. And there are a lot of coach-athlete relationships, unfortunately, where that power tussle is not acknowledged, or the coach takes the reins, so they hold the predominant power levels in this respect. And we know that the athlete then becomes more hesitant to ask questions and to learn and to better grasp key concepts. So that's obviously where the 7 keys come into play, as they become ingrained, ideally, in their game. Now, if those conversations cannot be had, then the athlete unfortunately ends up in a bit of a pickle. And when I say a bit of a pickle, we mean that they can reach a plateau and or stagnate, and or their progressions from one peak performance cycle to the next is hindered, or it is a lot slower than others. So it's not as effective and or optimal as we would like, and or when we're looking at the long game and the progressions that happen along the way, that player, that athlete, that child is incredibly more susceptible to falling behind. And this discussion is, again, scarcely had, because I think of the concern around this, that, oh no, like if we have to listen to that child, that player, that athlete, they're just going to take the power. And that's not what it's about. If you already have that power as that adult and you already are conscious of that, it's time to share. So it's time to make sure that it's mutual and reciprocal. And we have a lot of episodes in this respect about sharing that load, about sharing those levels of responsibility. But also, we are giving that coach more responsibility to maintain, let's say, certain facets of play, to manage the athlete overall, but also you're including them and you're teaching them about key steps that is going to serve an even bigger purpose as their ranking ascends, whether it's to the top 900 after those initial ranking points, which is a huge milestone, and or after their top 80 in the world, and that they begin to progressively ascend, ideally towards the top 20, then top 10. But we know why, and again, we've touched on this in previous episodes, we know why athletes, they stagnate, they get stuck around 80, 70 in the world. It's the same where we know players who have a remarkable season, they get inside the top 20, and then they regress back to that 70, 80 in the world, because their performance norm is around that. Their normalized state of play, it aligns with that 70, 80 ranking. It does not align with that top 20, top 10, and that is why they regress. And this is where a lot of the more serious work comes in, and conversations around how can they maintain that. And again, to not necessarily name drop, but the book currently that I'm working on, and I do share this now in our episodes, is really unwrapping that and sharing more. So I think being able to talk about it indirectly, so as in some way, shape or form throughout, I think this platform is incredibly rewarding for me personally, to be able to share those additional insights before they're even released. So you're getting, I think, a key window into my thinking process, so in one way, shape or form, which is really insightful. And that is obviously where 11 books to date have come about, and we're getting to the absolute pinnacle. But let's just back on track here. We've touched on that coach-athlete relationship. We've touched on the power, why that parent needs to be involved. If you do not have that parent or guardian for the players or athletes out there that is interested in being involved, that's okay. I hear you. This is typically the case for families that have multiple children or more than one child, and it's understandable. And I will put my hand up to say that was me. So my parents, so my mum and or dad, were not necessarily involved in this, and sometimes they were, but it wasn't as consistent. But they always were mindful of, in their own way, who that coach was, and that they were the right fit. And I was always able to have those conversations with them if I was not okay. However, there are a lot of grey areas there. So the conversation is to make it better. Make those conversations for the players, athletes, children out there better than what that was. And because a lot of these, let's say, injuries mishaps that I went through potentially could have been avoided or mitigated in some way, shape or form if there was a more solid coach-parent relationship and the understanding around that this was a cause, so that the cause effect from that. However, we are going back some 25 years ago, oh my goodness, when it started happening. And I'll put my hand up to say these injuries did happen very early on in my very early teenage years when this started to happen, unfortunately. But to be able to have that healthy relationship is incredibly powerful. So if you do not have access to that, and I should say because I have siblings, so my mom and my dad were pulled in different directions from in this respect. So for the parents out there, I hear you, I understand you, and all the guardians. So again, for the players, the athletes, the children or child, it's about finding that other person that is helpful, whether that is an older friend who's gives you that platform to find that voice, to be very conscious of that power tussle there, that we want it to be mutual, even an equilibrium of sorts to be found to build the most conducive coach-athlete relationship. If this, you may be incredibly lucky and a coach is already at this level, and I hope if you're a coach listening, I hope you are leading by example so other coaches can follow. This would be incredibly helpful because it means more players, athletes, children have the capacity to ascend towards the top 10, to stay on that pathway, to stay on the long game, because this is where it starts. It starts within that relationship dynamic, and that it is so absolutely fundamental to get it right, because you could have an absolutely sensational coach that knows lots of things. You could have an absolutely sensational player that also knows lots of things, but if they cannot work together, if there is not that mutual balance where they are heard and listened to, where they're working together as a team, the results will not follow. Not as I think each of those, whether the coach or the player athlete, would expect, because that relationship is not there. It has not been built. The work has not been done to create and look after that. So, and that's again where the parents or guardian comes into play. So if for the players, athletes out there, you do not have access to a present figure, you will have access to someone, whether that is an aunt and or an uncle, to be able to have those conversations with, a grandma or a grandpa, even just to have those conversations with. It's so important. Or it could be a teacher, for example, to have those conversations with. So there are so many variances here. It could be your next door neighbor. It does not matter. A figure and or person that your parents obviously trust and is known to the family and that knows you as a person, as that child, and is able to offer just an ear. To have these conversations, to share, to help you find that voice, to make sure that coach-athlete relationship is on a really conducive and helpful path. And this kind of crosses over then to the next topic in this chapter, which I have to confess, it's one of my favorites, but it's probably one of the most concerning as well, because it's hiring and firing your coach, the right mix. And that's on page 33. And I think it's funny, not funny, because a lot of coaches, when they see this, they get a bit cranky, and because they do not look at that coach-athlete relationship in this context. But in the real world, again, that humanized approach, in the real world, if something is not working, you take that next step. You take a different direction. And if it's an employer-employee dynamic And if that employee is not living up to set expectations, they are fine, they let go. Not a very nice conversation. But essentially, the player, the athlete, you are the employer. You are not the employee. The coach is actually the employee, because the player, the athlete, you are paying that coach for their services, right? And when we get to flip the script here, I think it's so incredibly powerful, because I am giving you that power. To the players, the athletes out there, I am giving you the power to rein that in, to know that you are, irrespective of your age, you are that employer. And in the real world, typically you need to wait until you're a lot older if we're looking at that developmental spectrum. And so if you're typically in your 20s, let's say you may start being an employer. It could happen later in your late teens, but it's probably easier to ascertain for the 18, 19-year-olds out there that you are the employer, not the employee. But if you have a coach and you're 18, 19 years of age and you have built that mutual understanding, that mutual respect, the power is shared, it's not argued or fought over, then this is not a cause for concern. But more often than not, if you are in your early 20s or 20s for that matter, and you have had a coach long term, it can be an incredibly challenging decision to let them go, so to fire them, because it's ideally because things are not necessarily working or you want a different change. So it's not attributed to a negative relationship. It's attributed to a want and or need for a change of direction. So that's really not what we're talking about here. We're talking about finding that right mix to know that they're on the same page, that they're allowing your voice to be heard, that they are not taking all the power and just keeping it to themselves and putting it in their back pocket. It's shared, and they're working with you as that child, as that player, as that athlete, to build healthy foundations that we know are attributed to progressing and reaching that next peak performance cycle that may be getting you from top 50 to say 35 in the world, and then within 6 months it's top 25. It's a progression and it takes time. It does not happen overnight. But the same applies for a junior looking at getting a state ranking and or a national ranking. We know this doesn't happen overnight. It's a work in progress. So whether that's a 1, 2, 3 year period where you are making those continued and continuous progressions, but to do that you need that right relationship where there's that mutual understanding there, that you are working towards this specific objective and or goal to begin with before you move on to the next. So you are a team. If you are wanting to progress and your coach is not on the same page, they're not progressing with you, the likelihood of that happening is minimized, so it decreases. And that is incredibly heartbreaking for that player athlete when you're looking at, okay, if I'm in my first 10 years of play, this is the pathway I would like to follow or I need to follow to get to a certain point. So there are very standardized approaches which you can deviate from in some respects, but you still need to have that healthy coach-athlete relationship to work together. If that healthy dynamic is not there, then you, as that player, that athlete, need to feel empowered, please, to fire them. Because if they are not conducive to your performance, to developing optimal performance outcomes, it's time to find the next one. Another personal recount, of course, unfortunately, this did happen to me. I did not know that I could do that. It wasn't until I think I was 15, 16 years of age and I was having a lot of concerns. I thought, this just isn't right. And then I think not until I was probably 17 did I change coaches. And there are a lot of warning signs along the way, which I won't get into, but I should have known better. And it would have been incredibly valuable to have that parent and or guardian step in to say, I don't think they are conducive to your performance, and then to find that new coach. But it was more or not the case of, if you don't know, then you just stay. And that's what happened, is that I did not know. And my parents then, they did not know that it was a negative influence and that they were not helping me progress. It was just stagnating. It was a plateau, which is so incredibly unhealthy when I obviously reflect and look back now with everything that I know. And so I'm trying in my best to, if you are that player athlete, to save you from that. But for the coaches, equally to save you from that, so you know what's right to do, what's best to do. And also for the parents and the guardians, to save you from that, to see that heartbreak in your child's eyes, to know that you can feel empowered to step in, to make sure you're having those conversations if they feel like they're progressing, that they're having those conversations with their coach and they are being heard, and that they have a plan in place. Obviously, if there is no active plan in place and they're not working towards anything in particular, you really need to question why. What is that core objective? Does that exist? If you're not working towards it, why? What is the underlying reason there? And obviously, again, that power tussle, if that exists, if it is reciprocated, if there's a really healthy dynamic going on, then there's no need to have the conversation about firing your coach. But I can't think of anything more powerful to begin again that the application or applicability here about that humanized approach from the real world when it comes to the employer-employee, the hiring and the firing, to begin to share those lessons with that child, that player athlete, about how this works, how they're interrelated, and the applicability in sport with that coach and that athlete as in life. And we touch on this in the 7 keys to optimize your life, which again I've touched on, obviously really runs home with tennis as that blueprint in unraveling the 7 keys. But each and every chapter shows the cross sections of how these elite performance metrics that deliver a top 10 tennis ranking can deliver the reciprocal, as in that top 10 performance in life as that employer and or employee. And it even touches on whether you are in the boardroom or you're an accountant or you're making coffee, irrespective if you're the most exceptional barista there is, and or account executive, it does not matter. We're looking at how it's transferable when we're having the discussion around reaching optimal performance. What is optimal performance success? And I think this in this context, but then in the 7 keys explicitly, we know and we have the data and the work behind how to develop a top 10 ranking. And it's so good, it's so powerful that we now know how this transfers. And having that conversation for the parents and or guardians out there with your child about the applicability of employer-employee, just for example, about how they have that power to employ the coach, and if they are uncomfortable and something is not working for them, that they also can be empowered to find a new one. Not that I encourage using the word, obviously, fire, because I think there are very unhealthy connotations around that. Irrespective of what age you are, it's very unpleasant, but it's about having the conversation. And if you've tried having the conversation about, I want to make sure I'm heard and listened to, and this is mutual and it's reciprocal, and there's a really healthy understanding, and that we're working towards that common goal, and that you also believe that I can get there, and that you have the tools to get me there, and I want to work with you to get there. And so there's a lot of we and us and together as that team to get there. And if that does not exist, it's about finding someone that wants to work with you to get there, or who is capable of working with you to get there. And this really underscores the importance of having access to the 7 keys. And so I think the biggest sign in neon lights is that if they have read and digested the 7 keys, if they're privy to and conscious of the 7 keys, and they know how to apply them, that is a green flag. The red flag is if they have not. The red flag is if they're not even conscious of the secrets to optimal performance success, because this text sets the foundations, irrespective of what level you are at. So irrespective of your number 15 in the world or your number 90 in the world, in respect to your rankings, it does not matter, because as in life, so that humanized approach, as you evolve and grow and mature, what you may have read 5 years ago, and if you read now, takes on a new context because of that maturity, because of those varying levels of understanding. And if you've been following for some time now, you know all of this work crosses over with human behavior and my passion in sharing the intersection there, because this data crosses over quite heavily with human behavior and child development, which then crosses over into athlete development and those progressions from obviously child to young adult, etc. And we know certain behaviors that adults have and where they come from, and the different behavioral inferences that obviously occur, and how we can go to adapt and or modify that. Most recently, in our previous episode, we looked at reflective practice, or most succinctly, the attributed blog did. And it's so important to look at that, and reflective practice can be employed now when we're looking at our performance and that coach-athlete relationship, if there is a very healthy dynamic there, if it is applicable, if it is working with the pathway. Now, when I say, I guess, the applicability of that power relationship, is it healthy or not? Obviously, if it's not healthy, that's where we need to even more so look at its application to that end goal, if it is conducive. Now, most probably not. And that's where you have those, I think, you take time away to reflect, to employ those varying levels or types of reflective practice, to review if it is ideal, so again, conducive to your performance, your end goal, where you want to go. And I think a lot of players, athletes fall into this trap where they are not encouraged to review what's been working for them and what has not. But hopefully the adults out there, so the coaches, are conscious of this, and you are continuously and consciously reviewing. I'm sure for the parents and or guardians out there in your professional lives, you do employ these practices, you do review from that professional perspective, but we really want to employ the personal here, but allow and inform that child, that player athlete, to do the same. So to educate them on what reflective practice is, and to then employ that. Now, when we're looking at the player, the athlete who is in their second decade of play, so they are over their first 10 years of play. So now I'll talk to you. You are hopefully and or most likely on tour, WTA or ATP tour, and you're ascending, whether that's top 300. But ideally in this age bracket, if you are in your second 10 years of play, you're going to be inside the top 100. So that's more likely. If not, we want to get you to ascend inside the top 100. So if we really just fine tune or focus on the top 100, reflective practice is incredibly powerful, because I need to ask you what's working for you and what's not. I need to ask you, and we need to have that conversation about, do you know the 7 keys? Because there's an incredibly high chance you do not. If you're in the top 100 and you have not crossed, say, the threshold into the top 50 yet, there's a very high chance you only know maybe 1 or 2 of these keys. To get you to ascend towards the top 50, then to top 30, let's harness a few more. To get you towards the top 20, you need a complete toolkit. But to ascend towards the top 10, you need to have been applying. So there's that word again, the application, the applicability of these keys, and to really cement them into your game. And that's how we develop the barrier breaker. They cross the top 10 into the threshold. We cross the threshold. And this is a really powerful conversation. There's that power, again, the power tussle, and how it obviously is not just in that relationship dynamic, but it's in the results. So the powerful outcomes, powerful results, which is incredibly exciting and rewarding on all fronts. So I think it's time that we really wrap today's episode up on saying, when we're looking at that coach-athlete relationship, how powerful a really good, conducive relationship can be. And if it's not, don't be afraid to have that conversation about firing in a different, obviously, narrative. You saw a different language in that respect, of that if it is not working for you, to find that voice, to have that conversation. Because if you're serious about heading towards a top 10 tennis ranking, irrespective of where you are on the performance spectrum, irrespective of where your ranking currently is, by incorporating effective practices and reflective practice in that coach-athlete relationship, which crosses over with that conversation around hiring and firing your coach and finding the right mix, we need to find what works best for us, what works best for you, the player, the athlete, because we're all individuals. So there's going to be a very different dynamic, personal dynamic that works best for each individual, which is incredibly fundamental and key, especially when we're looking at something so incredibly exciting as such as progressing towards a top 10 tennis ranking. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really hope today's conversation really ran a few key messages home from reflective practice, coach-athlete relationship, hiring and firing our coach. I confess, I thought we would cover a lot more, but we got carried away. And I really hope that was in the best possible light, because it just went to show how many more additional insights are already jam-packed just in those, that first 1-2 episodes. So if you want to dive into these topics and learn more, then refer back to episode 1 and episode 2 that really touched on these topics, because the chapter for the most part the book is incredibly streamlined. So if you want to grab a copy of The Secrets to Optimal Performance Success, head on over to AIMA International and you will find that our episodes have been progressive, and that's for very good reason. If you've obviously picked up that undertone tone of today's episode in that respect. For any comments or questions, head on over to AM8 International or Topic Thread, the social platform set on data privacy. To interact with Beyond Top 10 Tennis, head on over to Twitter, Threads, LinkedIn, or Instagram. Please come and say hi. And to catch up on our weekly coaching tips, head on over to TikTok. There are a lot of coaching tips there. There can be multiple during the week, but we're trying to really fine tune that to give you just that single weekly segment to hopefully you latch onto and apply into your game, your performance, your coaching practices for that given week. To catch up on our blogs, head on over directly to AMA International, look for our blog page, they are all there. Or for something different, head on over to Medium, you'll find us there. And please come say hi and leave any comments or feedbacks. It's all open, so please do. But to access all of these links, as always, I'll leave all the links in the episode notes. For something different, head on over to Pink Octopus Books, that's where my fictional release is. Or to view this week's question and poll, be sure to visit Spotify. Or for something left of field, visit Spruik for some random polls. Again, I'd love your feedback on that. And of course, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, like, share, and all of the above would be absolutely phenomenal. For those of you who are interested, we do have scholarships available on AMA International, as well as opportunities exclusively to work with myself. We do have very small windows and placements, so don't be shy and come and say hi. On that note, thank you so much for listening. I am so incredibly grateful. I'm your host, Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge, and this is Beyond Top 10 Tennis, and I'll see you next time.